The penthouse smelled like betrayal. Not literally, of course. It smelled like Pappy Van Winkle, $5,000 a bottle, from the private collection Layla Rice had purchased in Kentucky 3 years ago. It smelled like Cuban cigars and the cold Manhattan air drifting in from the terrace. It smelled like home. But Layla would never forget the way those scents mixed together on the night she discovered her marriage was a business transaction she'd already lost. She'd just landed from Tokyo, 14 hours in the air, 3 days of negotiations that would have broken most men, an $80 million deal closed with a handshake and a smile that never reached her eyes. All she wanted was silence, a glass of wine, maybe her husband's arms around her, pretending for one more night that the exhaustion was worth it. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse, a 3-story monument to everything she'd built. Hudson Yards stretched beneath her, glittering like a promise she'd made to herself at 22 and kept every single day since. She stepped out and heard voices on the terrace. Layla didn't announce herself. Something in her gut, that same instinct that had made her a killer in boardrooms from Tokyo to Dubai, told her to stay quiet, to listen. She moved toward the glass doors, slowly, her Louboutins silent against the Italian marble. Paul's laugh came first, that easy, charming laugh she'd fallen for at a gallery opening 6 years ago. The laugh that made her believe a man could love her for more than her net worth. Then Declan's voice, Paul's so-called best friend, the man who'd stood beside him at their wedding, grinning like he'd won something. And then the words. Paul's voice, loose with whiskey and arrogance. Layla's great at making money, I'll give her that, but she's naive when it comes to love. Always has been. Ice clinked against crystal. Layla's hand found the door frame. Her knuckles went white. The prenup has an intellectual contribution clause, Paul continued. I've been laying the groundwork for months. Every deal she's closed, I've made sure my name is somewhere in the paperwork. The TechX merger alone is worth my weight in gold. When I file, I'm claiming I was the strategic brain behind Rice Capital's biggest wins. Declan whistled low. How much are we talking? Paul didn't hesitate. Half the company, $250 million, give or take. She keeps the furniture. The terrace fell silent for a moment. Then both men laughed, actually laughed. Layla didn't move, didn't breathe. Her heart was beating somewhere she couldn't locate anymore, somewhere outside her body maybe, floating in the cold air above Manhattan. She's pathetic, Declan. Paul's voice again, dripping with something she'd never heard before. Contempt. Pure, undiluted contempt. She actually thinks I love her. All I have to do is hold on for one more month. 5-year anniversary. That's when the clause activates. Then I'm free, and I'm rich, and she's wondering what the hell happened. One more month. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of late nights and early mornings, 5 years of building something she thought they shared, and all of it, every kiss, every whispered promise, every time he'd held her after a brutal day and told her she was enough, all of it had been a countdown. She was a line item on his exit strategy. Something inside Layla shifted, not broke, shifted, like a gear clicking into place, like a door closing softly in an empty room. The part of her that believed in this marriage, that wanted so desperately to be loved for something other than her empire, that part simply went dark. No tears, no trembling, just silence. She stepped back from the door. 1 step, 2. Her reflection caught in the glass, a woman in a wrinkled silk blouse, dark circles under her eyes, 14 hours of travel written across her face. A woman who'd just closed an $80 million deal and come home to discover she was the product being sold. The elevator was still open behind her. She turned, walked back in, pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, she pulled out her phone. Her hands weren't shaking. They should have been, but they weren't. She typed one message to Philippe Dixon, the most expensive corporate attorney in New York and the only man who'd never lied to her. Activate Protocol Icarus, now. Then she exhaled, slowly. The elevator hummed beneath her feet. Paul thought he was the shark in this marriage. He didn't realize he'd married one. but I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how Layla Rice ended up standing in her own penthouse, listening to her husband plot her destruction over a glass of whiskey she paid for, you need to know how we got here. Her name was Layla, 38 years old, founder and CEO of Rice Capital, one of the most aggressive venture capital firms on Wall Street, self-made, relentless, and, until 3 minutes ago, married to a man she believed loved her. She built empires, but she couldn't see the traitor sleeping beside her. That was about to change. 6 years earlier, Layla Rice walked into a Soho gallery opening alone. She hadn't planned to stay long. These events were transactional. See and be seen, exchange cards with people who wanted her money, smile until her face ached. But the wine was decent, the art was forgettable, and she was about to leave when a voice behind her said, "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." She turned, and there was Paul Chase, tall, dark hair swept back like he'd just stepped off a yacht, a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes in a way that felt almost genuine. He wasn't wearing a name tag, wasn't holding a business card, just a glass of red wine and an expression that said he saw right through her. Layla raised an eyebrow. "Is it that obvious?" He shrugged. "Only to someone who feels the same way. I'm Paul." "Layla." He didn't ask what she did, didn't glance at her watch or her shoes or any of the usual tells men use to calculate her worth. He just talked to her about the art, about the pretentious crowd, about a hole-in-the-wall taco place 3 blocks away that was infinitely better than the canapés circulating on silver trays. 2 hours later, they were sharing carnillas in a plastic booth, and Layla was laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. That was Paul's gift. He made her feel seen. Not Layla Rice, the CEO, not Layla Rice, the empire, just Layla, a woman who worked too hard, slept too little, and secretly feared she'd traded her entire life for a corner office with a view. He didn't seem to care about her money. When she finally told him what she did, hesitantly, waiting for the shift in his eyes that always came, he just nodded and said, "That sounds exhausting. Do you at least like it?" No one had ever asked her that before. She should have seen it then, the way he deflected questions about his own career, the vague mentions of consulting and strategic advising that never quite added up, the charm that was almost too perfect, too calibrated, like a key designed for a very specific lock. But Layla was tired of being alone, tired of men who wanted her portfolio more than her presence, and Paul, beautiful, attentive, seemingly uninterested in her wealth, felt like a gift she'd finally earned. They married 18 months later, a small ceremony in the Hamptons, white orchids, a sunset that looked photoshopped. Layla wore her mother's pearls and cried when she said her vows. Paul cried too. She'd thought it was love. Now she knew it was anticipation. The prenup was Philippe Dixon's idea. "You're worth $400 million, Layla," he'd said, sliding the document across his mahogany desk. "I don't care if he's Prince Charming reincarnated. You protect what's yours." Layla had resisted at first. It felt unromantic, transactional, but Philippe was insistent, and Paul, to his credit, hadn't even flinched when she brought it up. "Of course," he'd said, taking her hand across the dinner table. "I'm not marrying you for your money, Layla. I'm marrying you because you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. Sign whatever you need to sign. I just want you." She'd believed him. God help her, she'd believed every word. What she didn't know, what Philippe would later explain in the quiet aftermath, was that Paul had studied that prenup like a surgeon studying anatomy. He'd found the clause about intellectual contribution. He'd understood exactly what it meant, and he'd spent the next 5 years carefully, methodically inserting himself into the paper trail of every major deal Rice Capital closed. Consulting fees, strategy meetings, his name CC'd on emails that didn't require his input, small touches, invisible threads, all leading to one conclusion. Paul Chase wasn't just Layla Rice's husband, he was the secret architect of her success.
It was a lie, of course. Paul couldn't close a deal if his life depended on it. His strategic advice was recycled business school platitudes, dressed up in expensive suits. But paper trails don't capture competence, they just capture presence. and Paul had made very sure he was present. The other players entered slowly, like actors taking their marks. Beatrice Chase, Paul's mother, a Park Avenue socialite whose fortune had evaporated 2 husbands ago. She wore Chanel like armor and smiled at Layla with the warmth of a woman calculating her son's inheritance. Every family dinner was a performance. Every compliment came wrapped in something sharper. "You work so hard, Layla," Beatrice would say, patting her hand. "I do hope Paul isn't feeling neglected. Men have needs, you know, needs that can't be met by a corner office." Layla smiled and said nothing. She'd learned early that engaging with Beatrice was like wrestling fog. Declan Jones was different, Paul's best friend since prep school, a minority partner at Rice Capital, a position Layla had created as a wedding gift, against Philippe's advice. Declan was charming in a rougher way than Paul, less polished, more hungry. He watched Layla in meetings with an expression she couldn't quite read. Now she understood. He'd been watching for weaknesses, cataloging them, reporting back. The signs had been there for years. Layla just hadn't wanted to see them. The way Paul's interest in her work had shifted from curiosity to calculation. The questions about deal structures that felt more like interrogations. The subtle suggestions that she include him in meetings he had no business attending. "I just want to support you," he'd say. "Let me help carry the weight." She'd thought it was love. It was reconnaissance. The affair started, she'd later learn, 2 years into their marriage. Katie Holmes, 26, an influencer with 3 million followers and a talent for spending other people's money. Paul had met her at a charity gala Layla had skipped for a Tokyo trip. He bought Katie a Cartier necklace, $40,000, charged to a card Layla paid off every month without reading the statements. But that discovery would come later. Right now, standing in the elevator as it descended toward the lobby, Layla only knew one thing. Her husband was planning to destroy her, and he thought she was too naive to see it coming.
Paul thought he'd married a victim. He was about to meet the predator. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now let's continue. The first time Layla noticed something wrong, she dismissed it as exhaustion. It was a Tuesday. She was reviewing the quarterly reports when Paul walked into her home office, the one room in the penthouse that was supposed to be hers alone, and sat down across from her desk like he owned the place. "I scheduled a lunch with the Meridian Group," he said, scrolling through his phone. "They're interested in the Series C round. I figured I'd handle the initial pitch, warm them up before you come in for the close." Layla looked up from her laptop. Her fingers paused on the keyboard. "Paul, Meridian is a $100 million opportunity. I've been cultivating that relationship for 8 months." "Exactly," he smiled, that easy, charming smile. "Which is why I wanted to help. You've been running yourself into the ground, Layla. Let me take some of the weight. That's what partners do." Partners. The word sat between them like a stone. She should have said no, should have drawn the line right there. But Paul's eyes were warm and concerned, and she was tired, so tired. And maybe he was right. Maybe this was what a real marriage looked like. "Okay," she said, "but I want a full briefing before the meeting." Paul's smile widened. "Of course, you'll barely know I was there." He was there, at every meeting, in every room. Over the following months, Paul inserted himself into Rice Capital like a virus replicating through healthy tissue. He attended strategy sessions he wasn't invited to. He scheduled calls with investors without telling Layla. He started signing off on internal memos with his name directly below hers. When she questioned it, he always had an answer ready. "I'm just trying to learn the business, babe. Isn't that what you wanted? A husband who understands your world?" The investors like seeing a unified front. It builds confidence, trust me. Or when she pushed back harder, "Why are you being so territorial? I thought we were a team. I thought you wanted me involved." That last one always worked. It flipped the script, made her feel guilty for protecting what she'd built, made her wonder if she was being paranoid, controlling, the kind of workaholic wife who pushed her husband away. So she let it slide, again and again, small concessions that added up to something larger. What Paul didn't know was that every meeting he attended was logged, every email he sent was archived, every document he touched was time-stamped and tracked.
Philippe Dixon had implemented the monitoring system 3 years ago when Layla first noticed irregularities in the accounting. She'd suspected embezzlement, an employee skimming funds. She never imagined the thief would be sleeping next to her. The dinners were worse than the meetings. Paul had a talent for humiliation disguised as affection. He'd perfected it over years, small cuts delivered with a smile, each one deniable on its own, but devastating in accumulation. At a charity gala, surrounded by the most powerful investors in New York, Layla's brilliant, of course, but between us, I'm the one who keeps her grounded. She'd work herself to death if I let her. Polite laughter. Layla's jaw ached from the effort of smiling. At a dinner party with potential clients, my wife's amazing, but you know how these type A personalities are. Sometimes you have to remind them that money isn't everything. That's my job, keeping her human. More laughter. The clients glanced at Layla with something that looked almost like pity. At her own birthday celebration, in front of friends she'd known for 20 years, I got Layla something special this year, a weekend at a spa. Lord knows she needs it. She's been so stressed lately, and stress ages women faster than anything. His hand on her shoulder, that concerned, loving smile. I just want my wife to feel beautiful again. Layla opened the gift, smiled, said thank you, and felt something curdle in her chest.
She wasn't stupid. She knew what Paul was doing. He was rewriting the narrative, positioning himself as the caretaker, the stabilizing force, the reasonable one who managed his difficult, workaholic wife. When the divorce came, and it was always going to come, she realized now, everyone would remember these moments. They'd remember Paul's concern, Lila's stress, the whispered implications that she was falling apart without him. He was building his case in public, one dinner party at a time. And she was letting him, because calling it out meant admitting it was happening, meant accepting that her marriage was a con she'd been too lonely to see. The Cartier receipt changed everything. Layla found it by accident, a crumpled piece of paper in Paul's tuxedo jacket dropped off for dry cleaning. She almost threw it away, but something made her unfold it. Cartier, Madison Avenue, One Love necklace, white gold, $42,500. She didn't own a love necklace. She didn't wear necklaces at all. For a long moment, Layla just stared at the receipt, her mind cycling through explanations. A gift for his mother. A surprise for her that hadn't arrived yet. A mistake somehow, a clerical error. But she knew, in her gut, in her bones, in the part of her that built an empire on reading people's lies, she knew. She didn't confront him. That was the first rule of any hostile negotiation. Never reveal your position until you understand theirs. Instead, she called Philippe Dixon. I need you to pull the monitoring logs on Paul's accounts, all of them, going back 3 years. She could hear Philippe sit up straighter on the other end of the line. What are we looking for? Everything. What Philippe found was worse than an affair. Paul had been hemorrhaging money for years, not into investments, not into business ventures, into a private poker club in Macau called the Velvet Room, an underground establishment where minimum buy-ins started at $100,000 and the clientele included oil sheiks, tech billionaires, and men with more ego than sense. Paul was firmly in the last category. $14 million. That was the total. $14 million lost over 18 months, transferred through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts designed to hide the bleeding from Lila's auditors. He didn't even win occasionally, Philippe said, his voice carefully neutral. The records show consistent losses, large losses. He was chasing bad money with worse. Layla closed her eyes. Where did he get $14 million? His consulting fees aren't even close to that. Silence on the line. Then, Layla. He's been siphoning from the operating accounts, small amounts spread across multiple subsidiaries, nothing large enough to trigger an audit flag, but over time, he's been stealing from my company. Yes. And the affair? Philippe sighed. The Cartier necklace was purchased for a woman named Katie Holmes, 26, influencer, model. According to her social media, she's been receiving gifts from an anonymous benefactor for the past 2 years. High-end jewelry, designer bags, a trip to the Maldives that cost more than most people's annual salary. All funded by my money. All funded by your money. Layla opened her eyes. Through the window of her office, Manhattan glittered like a promise. All those lights, all those people, all those deals being made and broken while she sat here discovering her life was a lie. She thought about the prenup, the intellectual contribution clause, Paul's careful years of positioning himself as the co-architect of her success. He wasn't just cheating on her. He wasn't just stealing from her. He was building a case to take half of everything she'd built and using her own money to fund his gambling addiction and his mistress while he waited for the right moment to strike. It was almost impressive. Almost. "Layla," Philippe said carefully, "what do you want to do?" She thought about the terrace conversation, Paul's laugh, the way he'd called her pathetic, the countdown to 5 years that had been ticking in his head every time he kissed her goodnight.
1 month. That's how long she had before the clause activated. "Prepare Protocol Icarus," she said. "And Philippe, I want to know everything about Declan Jones, every account, every communication, every secret he thinks is buried. If Paul has an accomplice, I want them both." The dinner at Per Se was the breaking point. It was supposed to be a celebration, Rice Capital's biggest quarter ever. Layla had reserved the private dining room, invited the firm's top investors, planned every detail down to the wine pairings. This was her moment, her triumph. Paul made sure it became his. He arrived late, on purpose, she'd realized later, made an entrance when everyone was already seated, shook hands with the investors like he was the host and they were guests in his home, ordered a different wine than the one Layla had pre-selected, explaining to the sommelier that his wife's palate wasn't quite as refined as she liked to think. Then the toasts began. Paul stood before Layla could, raised his glass, smiled that perfect smile. "To Rice Capital," he said, "and to my brilliant wife, but more importantly, to the team, because what most people don't know is that behind every successful woman is a support system making the hard calls." He paused for effect. "I've been privileged to be part of this journey, to guide the strategy when needed, to be the calm voice when Layla's passion threatens to overwhelm her judgment." Layla sat frozen, her champagne untouched. The investors chuckled, nodded. Several glanced at her with that look she hated, the look that said, she must be difficult and thank God she has him. Paul continued, "To Layla, who lets me share in her success, who trusts me with the big decisions, who knows that a partnership is stronger than a solo act." He raised his glass higher. Everyone drank. Layla drank too, because what choice did she have? To correct him in public? To expose the lie in front of people whose investments kept her company alive?
The anniversary party was Paul's idea.
So she smiled, clinked glasses, said thank you to a man who just claimed credit for everything she'd built. That night, alone in the bathroom, she gripped the marble counter until her knuckles went white. She didn't cry. She'd learned not to cry years ago, but something inside her hardened, calcified, became the foundation for what came next. Paul had shown her who he was. Now she would show him who she was. She just had to wait. The isolation came next, subtle at first, then suffocating. Paul started questioning her relationships with almost surgical precision. "That partner of yours, Marcus," he'd say, casual as a knife, "I don't like how he looks at you. There's something predatory about him. You should distance yourself." Or, "I ran into your friend Diana at the gym. She was asking a lot of questions about your business, seemed very interested in our finances. Just be careful what you share with her." Or, most damaging of all, "I think Philippe is too involved in our personal lives. He's your lawyer, Layla, not your therapist. Don't you think it's inappropriate how much he knows about us?" Each suggestion planted doubt. Each warning built walls between Layla and the people who might have seen through Paul's facade. She watched it happen, understood the strategy, and she let it continue, because every manipulation Paul attempted was another piece of evidence, another proof of pattern, another nail in a coffin he didn't know he was building. But understanding the game didn't make it painless. There were nights when Layla sat alone in her office, the city dark outside her window, and wondered if Paul was right, if she was too difficult, too cold, too focused on work to deserve love. If this, a husband who was slowly dismantling her life, was the best she could hope for. Those nights were the hardest, not because she believed it, but because she almost wanted to, because believing would have been easier than accepting the truth. She'd given 5 years to a man who saw her as a business opportunity with a heartbeat. Not their wedding anniversary. That was still a month away. No, this was for Rice Capital. 10 years since Layla had founded the company in her studio apartment with $12,000 and a dream. Paul wanted to throw a gala, black tie, 400 guests at the Met. It'll be a statement, he explained, his eyes bright with plans that weren't his to make. A declaration. New York's elite all gathered to celebrate what you've built, what we've built. Layla noticed the shift, the subtle pivot from you to we. Paul, this is my company. I'd prefer something smaller. His face changed, just for a second, a flash of something cold beneath the charm. You're being modest, he said, which is sweet, but this isn't just about you anymore. This company is our legacy, our future, and our future deserves to be celebrated properly. She should have pushed back, should have held her ground, but Paul had a way of making disagreement feel like betrayal, like ingratitude, like she was the unreasonable one. Fine, she said, but I'm handling the guest list. He smiled. Of course, you handle the details, I'll handle the vision. The gala was a disaster disguised as a triumph. Paul gave another speech, longer this time, more personal. He spoke about the early days, days he hadn't witnessed, as if he'd been there from the start. He referenced deals he knew nothing about, strategy pivots he'd learned secondhand, and the audience ate it up. What a partner, someone whispered behind Layla. She's lucky to have him. Most women like her end up alone. Layla stood at the edge of the room, champagne warming in her hand, and watched her husband take credit for her life. This was his plan. Not the money, though that mattered, the narrative. He was rewriting history in real time, building a version of events where Paul Chase wasn't the trophy husband. He was the architect, the mastermind, the man behind the woman. When the divorce came, he wouldn't just take her money, he'd take her story. 3 weeks before the anniversary, Paul made his move.
He came home late one evening, a manila folder tucked under his arm. His smile was wider than usual, more confident, like a poker player who'd finally drawn the winning hand. I had a meeting with the accountants today, he said, settling onto the couch beside her, going over some projections. Layla didn't look up from her tablet. Oh? Mm-hmm. He opened the folder, spread papers across the coffee table. I've been doing some thinking, Layla, about our future, about the company, and I realized something. She waited. Rice Capital has grown by 400% since we got married. 400%, and I've been there for every major deal, every strategy session, every pivotal moment. He paused, let the words settle. I think it's time we formalized my contribution. Layla's fingers stopped scrolling. She looked at him, really looked. Paul's face was arranged in an expression of reasonable concern, the loving husband suggesting something perfectly fair. But his eyes were hungry, calculating, the eyes of a man who thought he was about to close the deal of his lifetime. What exactly are you suggesting, Paul? A partnership restructure, official recognition of my strategic role, 50-50 ownership going forward. He spread his hands. It's only fair, Layla. I've given everything to this company. To us, I deserve to be recognized. There it was, the play she'd been waiting for, laid out on her own coffee table like a declaration of war. Layla set down her tablet. Her heart was calm, steady. This was familiar territory, the moment before a negotiation turned hostile. She let the silence stretch, let Paul's confidence curdle into uncertainty. Then she smiled. Let me think about it, she said. It's a big decision. Paul blinked. He'd expected resistance, arguments, leverage points he could exploit, not compliance. Of course, he said slowly. Take your time. I just want what's best for both of us. I know exactly what you want, Paul. She rose from the couch, walked toward the bedroom.
And behind her, Paul's smile flickered, just for a moment, a shadow passing over the sun. He thought he was winning. He had no idea the game had already ended. The week before the anniversary, Paul Chase walked through life like a man who'd already cashed his check. He booked a weekend at the Maidstone in East Hampton, $12,000 a night, charged to a card Layla's accountants would never see. He scheduled a golf outing with Declan to celebrate. He even bought a new watch, a Patek Philippe, $200,000, a gift to himself for services rendered. Layla, for her part, played her role perfectly. She came home earlier, smiled more, asked about his day with what appeared to be genuine interest. When Paul suggested a romantic dinner to celebrate their upcoming anniversary, she agreed without hesitation. 5 years, he said, lifting his wine glass across the candlelit table. Can you believe it? Layla raised her own glass. The crystal caught the light, fracturing it into rainbows. Time flies. I was thinking we should renew our vows, Paul continued. Something small, intimate, just the two of us and a few close friends, maybe in the Hamptons where we got married. That sounds lovely. Paul reached across the table, took her hand. His thumb traced circles on her palm, the same gesture he'd used on their first date, when she'd thought he was the answer to prayers she didn't know she was making. I love you, Layla, he said. His voice was thick with something that almost sounded like emotion. I know things have been difficult lately. I know I'm not always easy to live with, but I want you to know, everything I do for us, for our future. Layla looked at their intertwined hands, at the ring on her finger, a 6-carat diamond he'd picked out himself, paid for with her money. She thought about the $14 million, the gambling debts, Katie Holmes posing in Cartier on Instagram while Layla worked 18-hour days to fund her lifestyle. The conversation on the terrace, the contempt in Paul's voice when he'd called her pathetic, and she squeezed his hand.
I know, she said softly. I love you too. Paul's smile widened, the smile of a man who'd won. He didn't notice the way Layla's jaw tightened, the way her eyes never quite warmed when she looked at him, the way her love you sounded exactly like goodbye. The next morning, Paul left for the Hamptons. Just a quick trip, he explained, kissing her forehead at the door. Golf with the boys. I'll be back Sunday night, and then we'll start planning our vow renewal. Layla straightened his collar. Have fun. He paused, studied her face. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Doubt, maybe, or suspicion. Layla had been too agreeable lately, too compliant. It didn't fit the pattern. But the moment passed. Paul needed to believe he was winning. Needed it so badly that he couldn't see the obvious. She smiled. He smiled back. And then he was gone. Layla stood at the window, watching his car pull away. The Porsche 911 Turbo, midnight blue, a $200,000 toy she'd bought him for their 3rd anniversary. He looked so small from up here, so insignificant. She waited until the car disappeared around the corner. Then she pulled out her phone. Philippe, it's time. Activate everything. On the other end of the line, her attorney's voice was calm and precise. Understood. The transfers will be complete within the hour. His accounts will be frozen by end of business today. And Declan? Meeting with him in 30 minutes. He's ready to cooperate. Good. Layla turned away from the window. Paul's Hamptons weekend should be memorable. She ended the call, walked to her home office, sat down at her desk. On her laptop, a secure folder contained everything: the monitoring logs, the gambling records, the affair evidence, the financial fraud. 5 years of betrayal, documented and organized. She opened a new document, typed a single line. Divorce petition, Layla Rice v. Paul Chase. Then she smiled. For the first time in months, it reached her eyes. Paul was on his way to the Hamptons, dreaming of freedom. He had no idea he was walking into a cage he couldn't see. The Maybach felt like a war room. Layla sat in the back, leather seats cool against her skin, watching Manhattan blur past the tinted windows. Philippe Dixon occupied the seat across from her, a tablet in his lap displaying numbers that would ruin her husband's life. "Walk me through it again," she said. Philippe adjusted his glasses. His voice was steady, the voice of a man who'd orchestrated hostile takeovers and survived corporate warfare without breaking a sweat.
At 2 p.m. today, I initiated transfers from every account Paul Chase has access to. The joint accounts, his personal accounts, the hidden accounts in the Caymans he thought we didn't know about. $53 million total moved to protected trusts in Switzerland and Singapore, jurisdictions with no reciprocity agreements, untouchable. And the credit lines? Frozen. Every card, every line of credit, every account with his name on it. As of 4:17 p.m., Paul Chase has a net worth of approximately, he glanced at the tablet, $842, the contents of his wallet. Layla nodded. What about the company accounts he's been siphoning from? Flagged for internal audit. When he tries to explain the $14 million in gambling losses, he'll find that every transfer has been documented. We have timestamps, routing numbers, and signed authorizations. Forged authorizations, I should add. He's been signing your name on withdrawal requests for 3 years. Fraud. Multiple counts, plus embezzlement, plus breach of fiduciary duty. If you want to press charges, he's looking at federal prison time. Layla considered this. Outside, the city gave way to the Long Island Expressway, trees rushing past like spectators at a race. Not yet, she said. I want him to feel it first. I want him to understand exactly what he's lost before the law gets involved. Philippe smiled thinly. As you wish. The meeting with Declan Jones happened in a private room at the Carlyle. Layla arrived first. She ordered a scotch, neat, no ice, and waited. Declan walked in 12 minutes late, sweating through his Brooks Brothers shirt. His eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal's. He'd aged 10 years since she'd seen him last. Mrs. Rice, he started, then stopped, swallowed. Lila, I don't know what to... Sit down, Declan. He sat. Lila studied him across the table. This was the man who'd stood beside Paul at their wedding, who'd laughed on that terrace about how pathetic she was, who'd helped plan the destruction of her marriage like it was a business strategy. He looked small now, frightened, a rat who'd realized the ship was sinking and was desperate for a lifeboat. You have something for me, she said. Declan reached into his jacket, pulled out a flash drive. His hand trembled as he slid it across the table. Everything, he said. Recordings of Paul discussing the prenup manipulation, his gambling contacts in Macau, his communications with Katie Holmes, financial records, strategy documents, everything. Lila picked up the flash drive, turned it over in her fingers. Why? Declan's laugh was hollow. Because I'm not stupid. I know when I'm on the losing side. Paul promised me a piece of the settlement, $10 million for my help. But now, he spread his hands, there's nothing left to divide, and I'd rather have your forgiveness than his loyalty. My forgiveness, she let the words hang in the air. You helped a man plan to steal $250 million from me, Declan. You laughed about it on my terrace, drinking my whiskey, and now you want my forgiveness? I want to survive, his voice cracked. I have a family, Lila, kids. If you bring me down with Paul, I lose everything. You should have thought about that before you betrayed me. Silence. Declan's face crumpled. Lila let him suffer for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out a document, slid it across the table. This is a resignation letter, she said, effective immediately. You forfeit your partnership stake, your profit shares, and any claim to future earnings from Rice Capital. In exchange, I don't pursue charges, and your name stays out of the divorce proceedings. Declan stared at the paper. His whole body seemed to deflate. What choice do I have? None, Lila said. That's the point. He signed without another word. Back in the Maybach, Lila plugged Declan's flash drive into her laptop. The files loaded slowly. Recordings, documents, photographs. She clicked on an audio file dated 2 months ago. Paul's voice filled the car. She's so predictable, Declan. Works 16 hours a day, comes home exhausted, barely notices I exist. I could be having an affair under her nose and she wouldn't see it. Oh, wait, I am. Laughter, both men. Lila's stomach turned. Another file, more recent. The anniversary's coming up, 5 years. After that, the clause kicks in and I file for divorce. By the time she figures out what happened, I'll be in the Caymans with Katie, spending her money. She'll get nothing. Not the company, not the accounts, not even her dignity. I'll make sure everyone knows she was the difficult one, the cold, workaholic wife who drove her loving husband away. Layla closed the file. Her hand was steady, but something in her chest felt like it was burning. She'd known it, she'd heard it herself on the terrace, but hearing it again, hearing the casual cruelty, the contempt, the absolute certainty that he'd won, it cut deeper than she expected. She thought about calling Paul, confronting him, letting him hear her voice as his world collapsed. But no, that wasn't how this worked. Paul deserved to feel it first, the confusion, the panic, the slow, dawning horror of realizing he'd lost everything he never earned. She looked at her phone. No messages from Paul yet. He was probably on the golf course, celebrating prematurely. Give it time, she thought. The call would come soon enough. The call came at 4:47 p.m. Layla was in her home office reviewing the final divorce documents when her phone buzzed, Paul's name on the screen. She let it ring 4 times before answering. "Hi, honey." Her voice was light, casual. "How's golf?"
On the other end, Paul's breathing was ragged. "Layla, something's wrong. My cards aren't working. None of them. I tried to check into the resort and everything got declined." "That's strange." "Strange?" His voice climbed higher. "I called the bank. They said my accounts are frozen. They said there's some kind of audit. What the hell is going on?"
Layla examined her nails. "I'm not sure, Paul. Did you try calling the accountants?"
"Of course I tried. They're not answering. Philippe isn't answering. Nobody's answering, except you."
"Well," she let the word stretch, "that does sound concerning." Silence. She could almost hear Paul's mind working, the first flicker of suspicion breaking through his panic. "Layla," his voice went quiet, cold. "What did you do?" She smiled. "I'll tell you what, Paul. Why don't you come home? We can discuss it in person." She ended the call. Paul burst through the penthouse door at 10:37 p.m. He looked destroyed. His golf polo was wrinkled, stained with sweat. His eyes were wild. The confident, charming man who'd left that morning had been replaced by something feral. Layla was waiting in the living room, seated in the leather armchair by the window, the city glittering behind her like a crown. "Sit down, Paul." "What did you do?" His voice shook. His whole body shook. "I can't access anything. My accounts, my cards, the house in the Hamptons rejected my reservation. My own credit is destroyed." "I said sit down." He didn't sit. He paced, ran his hands through his hair. When he looked at her, his expression flickered between rage and terror. "You can't do this. We're married. Half of everything is mine. My lawyers—" "What lawyers?" Layla's voice was quiet, measured. "You can't afford lawyers, Paul. You can't afford dinner. You have $842 to your name, and 60 of that is tip money from the Uber driver who brought you home." Paul's face went white.
Layla stood, walked toward him slowly. She'd never felt more calm in her life. "Let me explain what happened, Paul, since you're clearly confused. 3 hours ago, I transferred every asset you thought was yours into protected trusts. Your accounts, your investments, the $14 million you stole from my company to fund your gambling addiction, all of it gone. That's illegal." He was grasping now. "That's fraud. You can't just—" "I can, and I did. The accounts were always in my name, Paul. You were an authorized user, a courtesy I extended to my husband, a courtesy I've now revoked. The prenup, Layla smiled. "Let's talk about the prenup. You spent 5 years positioning yourself to trigger the intellectual contribution clause, 5 years building a paper trail to prove you were the strategic mastermind behind Rice Capital's success." Paul's eyes darted. He didn't speak. "The problem, Paul, is that I've been documenting your actual contributions for just as long. Every meeting you attended where you contributed nothing, every email you sent that was ignored, every strategy session where you just sat there." Her voice hardened. "You don't have a paper trail proving contribution. You have a paper trail proving presence, and presence isn't worth $250 million. Paul's face contorted. "This is about Katie, isn't it? You found out about Katie and now you're— This is about the fact that you married me to steal my company. This is about the fact that you called me pathetic while drinking my whiskey and planning my destruction. This is about the fact that you actually thought that I was too stupid to see it coming. I never—" "I heard you, Paul." He froze.
3 weeks ago, on the terrace, I heard every word. His jaw worked. No sound came out. Layla walked past him, picked up a manila folder from the coffee table, dropped it in his hands.
That's the divorce filing. You'll notice there's no mention of the affair, though I have enough evidence to make Katie Holmes' Instagram very interesting. There's no mention of the gambling, though federal prosecutors might find those forged authorization signatures fascinating. All I'm asking for is a clean split. You walk away with nothing, and I don't destroy what's left of your reputation. Paul stared at the documents. His hands trembled. You can't do this to me. I already have. He looked up. For a moment, just a moment, his mask slipped completely, and Layla saw what was underneath. Not a charming husband, not a master manipulator, but a small, desperate man who'd bet everything on a game he was never smart enough to win. Layla, his voice broke. Please, I have nothing. My mother, Beatrice, depends on me. Without your money, she'll lose everything. Funny you should mention Beatrice. Layla walked to her desk, picked up another folder. Your mother came to see me yesterday, demanded to know why her precious son was being humiliated. Paul's face twisted with hope. What did you tell her? I showed her the records, Paul, the account statements, the gambling losses. She paused, let him absorb the blow. I showed her that the retirement fund I created for her, the fund that was supposed to secure her future, you liquidated it 2 years ago. You lost it in Macau, every penny. No. And the house in Connecticut, the beach house she loves so much? You put it up as collateral for a poker game. You lost that, too. She just didn't know it yet. Paul's legs gave out. He sank onto the couch, the divorce papers crumpling in his fist. Beatrice won't take my calls, he whispered. She blocked my number. I know. Layla's voice held no sympathy. She's staying at the plaza, on my dime, incidentally. She was very grateful when I offered to cover her expenses while she distances herself from her son. You turned my mother against me. No, Paul, you did that yourself. I just showed her the receipts. The next 6 weeks unfolded like a slow execution. Paul tried to fight. He found a lawyer, some ambulance chaser from Jersey City who took the case on contingency. They filed motions,
Demanded discovery, claimed undue influence and financial manipulation. Philippe Dixon dismantled every argument with surgical precision. In court, Paul attempted his last gambit. He wore his best suit, the Tom Ford, custom-tailored, purchased 3 years ago for a charity gala. He sat straight, spoke clearly, presented himself as the wronged husband, blindsided by a vindictive wife. His defense? The missing millions were cryptocurrency investments. High risk, yes, but legitimate. The losses were unfortunate, but not criminal. The transfers to Macau were business expenses, research trips to explore Asian markets. The judge listened politely. Then, Philippe presented the evidence. Records from the Velvet Room, membership documents, buy-in receipts, photographs of Paul at the poker table, surrounded by chips and champagne and women who weren't his wife. Testimony from a former croupier who'd watched him lose $3 million in a single night. Your Honor, Philippe said calmly, these weren't investments. This was addiction. And Mr. Chase funded his addiction by embezzling from his wife's company and defrauding her of her rightful assets. Paul's lawyer tried to object. The judge overruled him. The ruling came down 3 days later. All gambling debts were declared Paul's sole responsibility. The embezzled funds were ordered returned to Rice Capital with interest. Paul's claim to the intellectual contribution clause was denied for lack of evidence. The divorce was granted. Layla kept everything. Everything. Paul's face, as the judgment was read, would stay with Layla forever. Not because it brought her joy, though there was satisfaction, she wouldn't deny it, but because she watched the exact moment his mask fell away completely. He'd walked into that courtroom believing he could still win, believing his charm, his smile, his rehearsed sincerity could sway the judge the way it had swayed investors and clients and his own mother for decades. He'd put on his best suit, fixed his hair, prepared a statement about his contributions to the marriage and the company. And then Philippe Dixon produced exhibit after exhibit. The poker club receipts, the forged signatures, the recordings from Declan's flash drive, the timeline of manipulation so precise, so damning, that even Paul's cut-rate lawyer stopped objecting.
The judge looked at Paul, really looked at him, and said, "Mr. Chase, in 23 years on the bench, I've seen many attempts to weaponize divorce proceedings. This ranks among the most calculated and predatory I've encountered." Paul's jaw dropped. "Your wife built her company through her own intelligence, labor, and vision. Your contribution, such as it was, amounted to attendance. You attended meetings, you attended dinners, you attended your own marriage, barely, while planning its dissolution for financial gain." "Your Honor," Paul's lawyer started. "I'm not finished." The judge's voice cut like a blade. "You also stole from her, forged her signature, funneled marital assets into illegal gambling operations, and worst of all, you did it while accepting her trust, her support, and her love." The courtroom was silent. "This court finds no merit in your claims and significant evidence of fraud. You will return every cent you embezzled. You will forfeit all claims to Rice Capital and its assets, and you will do so quietly, Mr. Chase, because if I see you in my courtroom again attempting to relitigate these matters, I will refer this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." Paul stood there, frozen. His expensive suit suddenly looked cheap. His polished shoes might as well have been shackles. Layla rose from her seat, collected her files, nodded once to the judge. She didn't look at Paul as she left. She didn't need to. She'd already won. Paul tried one more time. It was a Thursday night, 2 weeks after the ruling. Layla was working late reviewing acquisition targets when her phone buzzed with an alert from the building's security system. Someone was trying to enter the penthouse. She pulled up the camera feed. Paul stood in the elevator lobby, jabbing at the keypad with increasing desperation. His suit was rumpled, his tie undone. Even through the grainy video, she could see the empty bottle of scotch dangling from his fingers. He was screaming something. The microphone picked up fragments. "Let me in! My home! You owe me! You owe me!" Layla watched for a moment. This man, this pathetic, desperate man. He'd planned to take everything from her. He'd laughed about it. He'd called her naive. Now he couldn't even open a door. She pressed the intercom button. "Paul?" Her voice echoed through the lobby speakers. He looked up, wild-eyed. "Go home." "This is my home. I built this. You stole." "You built nothing. You stole everything. And now you're trespassing. Security is on the way. If you're still here when they arrive, I'll press charges." She watched his face crumble. "Layla," his voice was different now, smaller. "Please, I have nowhere to go." "That sounds like a you problem, Paul." She ended the transmission. On the screen, Paul sank against the wall. He stayed there for a long moment, head in his hands. Then security arrived, 2 men in black suits, professional and impersonal, and escorted him out of the building. Layla watched until he was gone. Then she turned back to her computer, back to the acquisition targets, back to the empire he'd tried to steal. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt tired and relieved and finally free. The next morning she filed a police report. Trespassing, harassment. The building's security footage made the case airtight. Paul spent 36 hours in holding before his public defender could arrange bail. Bail he couldn't afford. His mother refused to pay. His friends, such as they were, didn't return his calls. In the end, it was Declan Jones who posted the $3,000. A final act of guilt, maybe, or self-preservation. Either way, Paul walked out of the precinct with nothing but the clothes on his back and a court date for harassment. The charges were eventually dropped. Layla didn't need them. She'd made her point. Paul Chase would never set foot in her building again, would never speak her name in public before remembering what happened, would never forget who won.
6 months later, Rice Capital became Rice Global. The rebranding was Philippe's idea, a clean break, a new chapter, a signal to the market that Layla Rice was done being underestimated. The company expanded into European markets, Closed 3 deals in London, 2 in Frankfurt, 1 in Singapore. Revenue doubled. Layla stood at the window of her new office, corner suite, 47th floor, a view that stretched from the Hudson to the East River. Manhattan spread beneath her like a circuit board, all those lights and lives, all that ambition and hunger. She'd built this. Every deal, every dollar, every late night and early morning, it was hers, and nobody would ever take it from her again. Paul Chase lived in a studio apartment in Queens now, 400 square feet, a view of the elevated train tracks. He sold used cars at a lot on Northern Boulevard, working on commission, barely scraping by. The irony wasn't lost on Layla. She'd purchased his building 3 months ago. A strategic acquisition, Philippe called it, diversifying into residential real estate, nothing personal. But every month when Paul wrote out his rent check, he addressed it to Rice Property Management, a subsidiary of Rice Global, a company owned entirely by his ex-wife. He was late on his payment once, just once. A formal eviction notice arrived within 48 hours, signed by Layla's property manager. He never missed another payment. Katie Holmes moved on to a Saudi prince. The Cartier necklace was pawned. Beatrice Chase relocated to Florida to a modest condo purchased with the last of her savings. She never spoke to her son again. She did, however, send Layla a Christmas card that first year. 2 words, thank you. Declan Jones found work at a regional bank in Connecticut. He kept his head down, didn't return to Manhattan. There was a moment, just one, when Layla almost felt sorry for Paul. She saw him on the street, completely by accident. She was stepping out of a client dinner in Midtown, and there he was, walking the opposite direction. Older, thinner, wearing a coat she didn't recognize, probably second-hand, probably all he could afford. Their eyes met. He stopped.
She didn't. She walked past him like he was a stranger, like he was nobody, because that's what he'd always been, really. Nobody. A charming smile with nothing behind it, a con artist who'd mistaken her loneliness for weakness. She heard him say her name once, soft, almost pleading. She kept walking. The city swallowed her, the crowds, the lights, the endless rhythm of Manhattan that didn't care about broken marriages or stolen millions or justice finally served. She walked for blocks, past restaurants where she dined with Paul, past galleries where he charmed her, past the corner where he'd first asked for her number 6 years ago when she'd been foolish enough to believe a man could love her for something other than her balance sheet. She walked until the anger faded, until the sadness softened, until all that was left was clarity. Layla Rice had built an empire alone. She'd defended it alone, and she would grow it alone, because that's what she'd always done. Paul Chase had been a detour, a lesson, a reminder that the only person she could truly trust was herself. And that was okay. Some women wait for karma. Layla Rice preferred to deliver it herself. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. See you next time.